Our next presenter is Bethany Abbate. Bethany is the manager of AI policy at SIIA with extensive experience in cybersecurity and AI policy across various sectors. She previously worked at Alliance of America and in policy roles here in Oregon. She holds a degree from Willamette University and Johns Hopkins University. Please, the presentation, help me thank Bethany for coming up to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany, for the introduction and for the warm welcome since I've arrived today. My name is Bethany Abbate, and thank you to University of Oregon for having me come and speak today. I actually was an attendee of this conference in 2019, and that year, the biggest theme was about public-private partnerships in cybersecurity. And since then, obviously, the landscape has changed a bit with AI, but I thought I would bring back this theme and add a little bit of a policy flavor to it because I work in the public policy sphere. And obviously, I think this is on our minds of how AI is going to affect our lives and what policymakers are or are not doing about it. But first, I want to give a little more background about me. I am a native Oregonian. I grew up in Beaverton, Oregon, and I stayed in the state for my undergraduate studies. Sorry, U of O, I didn't go here, but I went to Willamette University in Salem, which, if you don't know where the campus is in Salem, it's right across the street from the state capitol. So while I was a student, pretty much every semester, I was going over to the Capitol and the government offices and working with various stakeholders, including I worked for former Governor Kate Brown, I worked for State Treasurer Tobias Reed, the legislature, the Department of Transportation, so all over the map. And this is a photo of me when I was a student, and I know I don't look like I've aged much since then, but a couple years in Washington, D.C. on the inside has really made me a little bit old and tired, which brings me to my career I've built in Washington, D.C. I moved out there to actually further do a deep dive of cybersecurity and intelligence issues, and I've always been primarily interested in the role of government in cybersecurity and technology and how technical and non-technical stakeholders can work together to try and solve some of these issues that we're dealing with. Since completing my studies, I've worked in a range of different roles where I have engaged in tech policy and cyber issues for different stakeholders. I worked on a congressional committee with actually, at the time, Chairman DeFazio, who used to represent Eugene before he retired, a couple of multinational companies I've worked with, and the investment community. And I currently focus solely on AI policy and tell you a little bit more about the organization I work for. So the Software and Information Industry Association is one of the leading technology trade groups that represent hundreds of companies across the software and information ecosystem, which includes some of the largest platforms that we all know about, but also global financial networks, education technology providers, B2B media companies. And so we kind of collectively work with different organizations to develop policy frameworks and policy advocacy around ideas that the industry can collectively get behind. And it's interesting because, a lot of companies have different priorities and different views on certain things, but there's other things where we work together to find compromise. And so we have a team of folks that specialize in different areas across the technology ecosystem: data privacy, education policy, IP, and cybersecurity issues, and AI. And AI has intersected really with all of these portfolios in the technology space. And you can learn more about us by going to our website. But essentially, we focus on how technology can benefit the good of the public, too, which, I think is an important thing to think about, is the benefits and the risks and how we can work together to solve them. So a little overview of what I'm going to cover in this presentation. I've sort of structured it into 3 parts. The first being the impact of AI on cybersecurity and I think there's going to be a lot of presenters today that are going to do more of a deep dive on the technical side of this. I'm not a technical cybersecurity person, but I think for the sake of grounding the conversation, it's good to give an overview of some of the opportunities and threats that we're seeing. Secondly, I'm going to give a brushstroke of what the AI policy landscape is looking like, not only in Washington, D.C., but across the country and across the world. And where does cybersecurity currently fit into that? Where does it not fit into that? And then lastly, that kind of sets the stage for the conversation about public and private collaboration. So how can government and industry and academia and all these other forums collaborate to advance AI safety and security goals to maintain US innovation and leadership in AI? And how can we leverage policy to make that collaboration effective and meaningful? So first, just touching on the impact that we're seeing of AI on cyber capabilities and the cybersecurity industry. So we're already seeing a trend where organizations really are looking to adopt AI into their cybersecurity strategy. And folks are still ironing out how they want that to look, but it is coming and it's already happening. We're seeing how AI is transforming cyber defense and kind of this dichotomy between a proactive versus reactive security. So AI is shifting reactive security measures that typically address known threats to now we're leveraging proactive strategies that use machine learning to predict and prevent emerging threats in real time, so faster, more efficiency, which in my next slide I'll talk about, there's cost effectiveness to that and a lot of benefits that organizations really want to take advantage of. And then this third component is an interesting one because I think when I initially kind of got caught up in the broader conversations around how AI is going to impact the workforce that, we're all talking about and the media likes to talk about a lot, I thought, well, maybe AI is going to solve some of the workforce challenges that we've had in cybersecurity where we haven't had enough professionals. We have a lot of unfilled cybersecurity jobs. So now if we're going to have AI automating a lot of these cybersecurity tasks, isn't that going to solve the problem? Well, actually, according to folks who are working in the field and CISOs and a lot of leaders, there's still going to be a need for a human component in cybersecurity. It actually presents even more opportunities for this, I would argue. Something in the AI space and in the policy space is a concept we talk about called human in the loop. So what does it look like to make sure that humans are still incorporated in the AI ecosystem? And in order to manage complex risks and ensure ethical use of this technology, we're going to have humans in the loop. So some opportunities to leverage these AI capabilities in cybersecurity, and like I said, I think other folks are going to dive deeper into this, but there's an opportunity to increase efficiency, improve accuracy, reduce costs, and improve scalability of threat detection, malware detection, and improving phishing prevention. And so because we're able to analyze data faster and in real time, this allows for some of these capabilities to improve. However, there's also a lot of emerging and ongoing threats that we're concerned about. AI-powered attacks can enable malicious actors to also automate things that are harmful and exacerbate existing risks that have already been in the cybersecurity landscape. One that I think, from a consumer's perspective that remains concerning is deepfake and phishing manipulation. So now we're seeing AI is able to generate more sophisticated and convincing deepfake content that's more personalized. And if we don't have a layer of AI literacy in society, it's going to be even harder and harder to discern, which communications are legitimate or not. And then, as I mentioned, there's an ongoing concern about the cybersecurity workforce shortage. Organizations are spending, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on cybersecurity every year, but we still have a really high vacancy rate of folks going into this field. And the shortage, and now with AI adding another layer to this, it could widen this gap. And we also still have an issue of, certain folks not pursuing a career in cyber because they don't think they fit into this, when in reality, now more than ever, we need more voices at the table, now that we have AI as a part of this. So to give a kind of an overview of some of the key issues in the AI policy space, and if you watched Oprah's televised special on AI, she honestly touched on all of these themes, so you're probably familiar with them. And I think she did a pretty good job with that televised special. But folks are really talking about all 6 of these things. This is not an exhaustive list, though. The first being AI safety. So how do we establish a basis to ensure the technology is being deployed in an ethical way that protects public interests and mitigates risks across sectors? Secondly, privacy and security in terms of access to personal data, data protection, and that's just kind of also where cybersecurity falls under. The third area that folks are really concerned about is synthetic content and deepfakes, and there's various forms of this type of content. Right now in an election year, I think we're all thinking about the concept of misinformation and manipulation in the context of our elections and how that can manipulate public opinion. There's also a growing concern around non-consensual intimate imagery. This is an issue where there's a lot of gaps in the law where this needs to be addressed in terms of how these AI-generated images are, very harmful, and I do a lot of advocacy around this issue. Fourth being, accountability and governance, making sure that organizations are using AI responsibly. Fifth, algorithmic bias is a term that probably a lot of folks have heard of and is a legitimate concern in terms of the data, the training data, inheriting biases, and potentially leading to further discrimination. And then lastly, an area of policy that a lot of people are talking about, especially in DC right now, and part of me thinks they're talking about it because it's sort of the easiest thing to check the box with. It's the least complicated of these issues, is how do we invest in AI literacy and public awareness to educate folks about AI and how to use it responsibly, and ultimately foster informed decision-making and trust in these systems. So I put this chart up here to sort of show visually that there's a lot of folks working on these issues in the US and across the world, and I won't line by line talk about all of these. I think I want to spotlight the Congress and what's going on at the state level. When I talk to folks who are not in the Washington, D.C. scene, I think there's a relatively a fair amount of pessimism that, are we too late now to do anything about AI? Because typically, given how slow our federal government and how maybe dysfunctional our Congress can be at times, are we going to actually make any progress to prevent risks in AI? And the optimist in me, and having been in this field for a couple of years, there's actually a lot of energy and a lot of productive conversations happening in Congress around how to deal with these issues. There's 2 important bodies that are working on this. There's a Senate AI working group that created a roadmap of legislatively how can we approach addressing AI, and the House is working on a subsequent report that is coming out in the beginning of November. And in addition to these 2 bodies that are doing insight forums with various stakeholders to learn about AI and how to go about it, there's been hundreds of pieces of individual legislation that have already been passed out of respective committees, and now it's just getting through the hurdle. So far, things that have been successful are around research and development of AI, because that really enhances our posture as a nation if we invest in that in AI. On the state level, there's also hundreds of bills across states, and even the largest, most well-resourced companies are struggling to navigate the legislative environment around AI. the past year, because even companies that have boots on the ground in all 50 states, it's so hard to keep track of how much is coming out around this, because folks really do want to do something. And in the absence of a federal framework around AI, states are going to start filling in the gaps. We've already seen a lot of action in Colorado, which passed a first in the nation regulation for AI deployers and developers that focuses on high-risk systems. And in California, we've also seen a slate of various AI bills that Governor Newsom just passed recently. And these are going to continue. Other states will build off of this probably. In Oregon, I want to spotlight, sadly, I don't keep up with Oregon as much, but in other states are doing this too. There's various advisory kind of working groups to figure out how state governments can embrace AI or navigate AI. And the governor has an advisory group that is working on AI issues. And actually, if anyone wants to ever do public comment, I think you can sign up and publicly weigh in on some of those meetings. So I would encourage you to look into that to see what the state is doing if you aren't already. So, I put up there's all these things happening in all these different agencies and bodies and in the states and in the Congress. But in the absence, typically in the past, in other sorts of emerging technology, when there isn't a regulatory framework, what can we do to sort of set a baseline for how technology is used? And so that's where the role of standards and frameworks come in. And those of you who have been in the cybersecurity space for a while probably know that cybersecurity standards they're relatively mature now compared to where they used to be. And there's a couple of ones that folks typically leverage, which is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, the ISO and IEC work, which helps organizations manage risks and implement best practices for protecting information systems. In contrast, the AI standards are really in the early stages of development because there's so many unique challenges to address with AI, and we don't even fully know what the capabilities of AI are going to look like in 10, 20 years, which makes it really hard to develop these concrete standards in the present. So in the meantime, we have these voluntary frameworks that are almost like a stepping stone to a standard. And NIST has developed an AI risk management framework that has become a really important baseline for industry. And it was developed in collaboration between private and public sectors. And it's essentially a framework for organizations to better manage risks around AI. And it's intended for voluntary use. It's not a regulation, but it is a framework and a set of best practices. There's also some other standard-setting bodies and some work that the US government is doing to try and revitalize the standard-setting process around emerging technologies, given the kind of unique nature of some of these technologies. So we're seeing some more interest in not doing things the way we have done in the past to accommodate the complexities of AI. And then there's voluntary commitments, which are also, sets of companies who are together deciding that they want to follow a set of guidelines to promote responsible innovation and address ethical concerns in the absence of formal regulations. And so we, see these pledges happening all across the board. I put up one example of an international example of the UK and the Republic of Korea governments and 16 organizations pledging on to this. There's also a similar set of commitments from companies in the United States. And we're also seeing now kind of more niche areas and concerns with AI, such as the image-based sexual abuse issue. There's a group of companies who are, committing to essentially collaborate and put forward prioritizing these principles so that they can uphold industry standards that are, ultimately designed to benefit consumers in the absence of policy. There's, quite a few ongoing examples of emerging AI and cyber policy initiatives. Cybersecurity has been an undertone in a lot of the policy conversations around AI, but there hasn't really been a ton of concrete action from a regulatory perspective. But there's a lot of actions that have already been taken in the existing model that we have around cyber where AI is being incorporated. So there was an executive order on safe and secure and trustworthy AI, national cyber strategy. These all kind of hinted at AI or the cyber strategy hinted at AI, but not fully fleshed out. And there's various other initiatives to sort of engage with the public sector and private sector collaboratively. But there's more work to be done. And we think development of good AI policy is probably going to require, to an extent, a new model of public-private collaboration to work together to address a lot of these concerns. So what are some areas where there are gaps or things that we could improve upon to encourage this collaboration and enhance US leadership? There has to be more funding in AI research and development. Congress is really the lever for funding some of these crucial programs, such as the US AI Safety Institute that's housed within NIST. It's currently not codified into law, therefore it can't be funded to the extent that it needs to be funded to have the resources to really effectively do this public-private collaboration around AI safety and research. There is an important element of aligning with international efforts, not only for company efficiency and compliance and managing that, but also to fight malicious actors who have negative intent against the United States. We have to like-minded nations work together and being interoperable. And then, some of these state laws, they have good intention, and I'm not here to argue, what's better, states, taking the lead on this or the federal government. Even if the states are going to take their own action on this, I think it's important for a federal comprehensive law to set a baseline. When we get too many of these standards and too many frameworks, at some point, right now it's working, it's because we have nothing else, but at some point it's gonna be too much to handle, right? So we need actually some direct clarity. So just some general takeaways. I think collaboration is an important catalyst in the AI space, and especially as we consider evaluating how AI and cybersecurity are intersecting. Human oversight is going to be really important in all of this, and I think policy that continues to prioritize human oversight and invest in the workforce, invest in AI literacy is going to be really important. And I don't think we should just say we're going to do it. I think we need to talk about how we're going to do that and how that's going to be effective. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the role of policy and R&D is extremely important. We need robust funding to be able to continue to build on existing initiatives and create new ones that are going to enhance collaboration, but also enhance safety and increase our cybersecurity posture while doing so. So with that, I think I might have a few minutes for questions, which I would love to take any questions, but thank you. Don't be shy.
Hello, my name's Katie. I work here at the University of Oregon. So I was wondering if you could talk about how academia may be able to play a role in developing some of these policies and all of that with AI.
Yeah, a couple of things. So, I mentioned the work that NIST is doing, and they've been really a pivotal leader in this space. And there's an AI safety consortium within NIST, and there's an opportunity. There's a lot of academics who are already involved, but I would encourage folks from the academic community to figure out how they can get involved in the safety consortium, because it brings together academia, industry, and government, and there's various kind of working groups on different types of subsets of these AI policy issues. So that's one. I think, I work with some education technology companies who are providing tools and software that are used both in the higher ed space and also in the K-12 space. And, I would encourage, and we have an effort at SIA, a set of education technology principles that are led by industry. And essentially, we think that industry and academia need to continue to have conversations in terms of the transparency around what's being included in these technologies that educators are using, and how does that fit into the model of maybe some of the data privacy policies that the school is trying to follow. So I think there's more collaboration and things where educators can continue to voice to their industry partners what they want to see. And we're, hearing a lot of concerns around, okay, how do we evaluate when we're procuring these technologies as educators and administrators? What do we even look for when we're evaluating these AI programs? So we think that's something where academia can be more vocal in what they need, and then the industry can kind of adopt and apply some of that feedback, because it's in the best interest of industry to serve its customers in that way and be transparent to the extent that it can. For students, I would encourage you to keep learning about AI to the extent possible. I think continue to experiment with it, and don't be afraid of it, but also be aware of what you're using. I think this really is going to fundamentally change not only the job market, but our lives. And so I think investing in your critical thinking abilities and how you engage with this technology and be curious about it is going to be really helpful no matter what you end up doing.
I'm from Portland State University, talking about the non-consensual intimate image abuse. Is there resources that you have found for helping people take down actual extortion?
Great question. So there's a couple of efforts that companies are trying to expand upon their ease of access in terms of where to report this, and how to get it removed. But companies only have so many resources to be able to do that. In the meantime, AI actually is going to be a resource to help detect and remove these images faster. So we need to make sure that companies are still able to do that. In the meantime, there are very distinct gaps in the law against those who create and perpetrators who create these images and disseminate them non-consensually, where this isn't even deemed as illegal right now. And so a lot of the work I've been doing this year is pushing for Congress to pass legislation that would, in the meantime, say, let's make sure that people are held accountable in this, and let's make sure that people aren't incentivized to do this. So I think it's a collaborative effort. Of course, industry can do more, and industry is really committed to doing more, which is why I featured the principles that industry and civil society are working together on. And I would encourage you to look more into the work of that group. If you look up ibsaprinciples.org, you can read from Center for Democracy and Technology. There's all kinds of groups that have put together resources for victims in trying to take that down. So there's a lot of momentum around collaborating on this issue, which is really good. But I think this is something that shouldn't be a politically charged thing, in my opinion. And I think there's things that Congress can do now, and the states. So thank you.
Sure. How about a very quick question?
Sure.
So, Jung Lee from University of Oregon, a professor in computer science. Also, I'm a director of the Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy here. So, very good talk. I have a very quick question. So, any insights on only having necessary policies, but not too many policies that become overkill, that you can see with not good consequences potentially.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, right now we don't have any, like I said, no concrete like federal framework, and so we have kind of too many other voluntary things happening at once. And so, figuring out like what is the right balance of how much and how little, I don't really have the direct answer to that. And I think part of that is because the technology itself is going to rapidly change so much. And we have to be agile in how we approach policy with this technology. It's not going to be like, basically what I'm saying is, to an extent, the government might have to change the way it kind of navigates these things to accommodate the rapid pace of development, because just sticking with one concrete policy for the next 10 years probably isn't going to make much of a difference 10 years down the line. So it's an ongoing conversation. Thank you for the question. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I put my email up here, but also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I frequently write about these issues, working on a podcast right now if anyone wants to continue to follow along. And I'll be around today if anyone wants to chat. Thank you.